Welcome to the Greg Review Show today. Today we're going to talk about a very important topic. Thumbs up, like and share this video. It's about a husband gives HIV to his wife after having a relationship with his male boss. Without further ado, let's get into this video. Thumbs up. Please like and share this video. Please support us through Cash App. That's GRC $mantrap. All that information is listed below. So without further ado, let's get quickly into this video. Here we go.
Raylan could hardly breathe as the doctor's words sank in, each one tightening the vice of disbelief around her heart. She sat there, staring into a void of questions with no answers, trying to make sense of a nightmare that had somehow become her reality. She was faithful, she was devoted, and yet she was infected. How? Days passed, tests piled up, and each result only confirmed the unthinkable. The truth clawed at her, a relentless ache that wouldn't let go. She tried to silence the whisper in her mind, the one pointing toward the unlikeliest of places. She didn't want to believe it, but there was only one person who could have brought this shadow into her life. Her husband. Could it be true? Could Omari, the man she trusted with her life, the man she had vowed to stand by, have been living a lie all along? Could he be hiding something so dark, so twisted, that it would leave her life in ruins? What would you do if the person you loved most became the source of your deepest fear? If the one you trusted blindly shattered your world in ways you never thought possible? As Raylan uncovered the truth, each answer would cut deeper than the last. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. I thank you, my viewers, most especially my subscribers, for your support. With purpose, with a family she could cherish and build memories with a husband by her side who would stand with her through every storm. She believed in love. Not the kind of love you see in movies, but a quiet, steady love that's built on respect and trust. She wanted a partner who shared her values, her commitment, her loyalty. And for a while, she thought she had found that in Omari. It was love at first sight, unexpectedly, almost as if fate had a hand in it. Raylan was attending a fundraiser event for a local community centre, and as she made her way through the room, shaking hands, smiling, and greeting faces she barely knew, her gaze fell on him. Omari stood out, tall, confident, with an easy smile that could disarm anyone. He was charismatic, yes, but there was something more. A warmth in his eyes, a gentleness that made her feel instantly at ease. He introduced himself with a firm handshake, and in that moment, Raylan felt something shift, a quiet sense of belonging she couldn't explain. Omari was the kind of man who could light up any room. In his work as a corporate executive, he had built a reputation not just for his skill, but for his charm. People gravitated to him, admired him, and often envied him. He was a man with presence, a man who seemed to have it all: success, respect, influence. But behind that confident exterior was a quiet storm, a well-kept vault of insecurities that he kept buried deep within himself. Omari's world was built on appearances, on the image he had carefully crafted and guarded. Beneath his polished surface lay desires he dared not reveal, shadows he kept hidden, even from himself. He had grown up with expectations, family expectations, cultural expectations, and his own belief in what it meant to be a successful man. He had followed the path set before him, built his life on discipline and ambition, and achieved everything he was supposed to. But some desires don't fade. They live within us, waiting, biding their time. For a while, with Raylan, he believed he could be everything she wanted him to be. He told himself that with her love, he could suppress the parts of himself that he feared the most. And for the first years of their marriage, that was enough. They were happy, at least on the surface. They built a life that looked perfect to everyone around them. A home filled with laughter, shared goals, quiet nights spent dreaming of a family they would one day raise together. But then there was someone else, Cameron Lattimore. Cameron was Omari's boss, a man whose presence loomed large, both in the office and in Omari's life. He was the type of man who commanded respect without ever asking for it. Authoritative, wealthy, and incredibly well connected, Cameron was a figure of power and influence, someone who had built his empire from the ground up. People often said that he was as charming as he was ruthless, that he could make or break careers with a single decision. And for Omari, that power was intoxicating. There was something magnetic about Cameron, a pull that went beyond admiration or respect. He had a way of getting under people's skin, of blurring the lines between professional and personal. He was the kind of man who could see through people, who knew how to exploit their desires, their insecurities. Cameron was not only Omari's boss, he was a force in Omari's life, a complex influence that would lead Omari down a path he hadn't intended to take. As Raylin and Omari moved forward in their marriage, those early days of laughter and shared dreams began to fade. Omari became more distant, his attention pulled in directions Raylin didn't understand. She attributed it to his job, the demands of his career, the pressure of success. She reminded herself that their love was built on trust, that sometimes life gets hard, but they would make it through. After all, marriage was a commitment, a promise to stand by each other through thick and thin. Raylin held on to that trust as if it were the very foundation of her life. She told herself that her loyalty would be enough, that her quiet support would bridge any gap that had grown between them. She worked longer hours, trying to fill the silence that had crept into their home. She buried herself in the lives of others, in the problems of the families she served, hoping that by helping them, she might find a way to bring her own family back together. But some things can't be fixed with love alone. And in the shadows of her husband's life, something else was unfolding, something Raylin would never have suspected. While she fought to keep their marriage alive, Omari was slipping further away, drawn into a world she couldn't see, tied to a man she didn't know. Raylin was faithful to her last breath, believing that their marriage, their love, was worth the fight. But as she would soon discover, sometimes trust is not enough. It began with something so small, so easy to ignore, a lingering exhaustion that settled into Raylin's bones. At first, she brushed it off as the toll of her long work hours. After all, she'd been putting in extra time, handling cases that pulled at her heart and drained her energy. Fatigue wasn't unusual for Raylin, and she chalked it up to life, to the pressures of her job, to the endless demands that came with helping others. But as the days turned into weeks, the fatigue grew into something heavier, something darker. Her body felt weighed down, her joints ached, and a dull headache settled at the base of her skull, refusing to let up. She began losing her appetite, pushing away meals that once brought her comfort. Even her favorite foods seemed tasteless, like shadows of the flavors she used to enjoy. Soon she found herself waking up each morning feeling just as tired as when she went to bed, a kind of weariness that sleep could not shake. Raylin tried to push through it. She told herself it was just stress, that she needed to take better care of herself. She threw herself into remedies she hoped would help: long baths, herbal teas, stolen moments of rest whenever she could manage. She even took up a morning walk, hoping the fresh air might ease the fatigue that clung to her. But nothing helped. Instead, the exhaustion grew deeper, her body growing weaker with each passing day. Concerned but hesitant to worry anyone, she kept these feelings to herself. She didn't want Omari to see her as fragile or needy. In her heart, she felt a sense of duty to remain strong, to be the supportive wife who didn't complain, who didn't add to the burden of his already stressful life. She told herself it would pass, that she just needed to power through. But there came a morning when she looked at herself in the mirror and saw something she could no longer ignore. Her skin was pale, her eyes dull, and she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. The weight of it all hit her, a fear creeping into her thoughts that maybe, just maybe, this was more than stress. It was a thought she didn't want to entertain, a whisper she wanted to silence, but it had grown too loud to ignore. Finally, Raylan made the decision to see a doctor. She put on her bravest face as she walked into that clinic, hoping the doctor would tell her what she'd been telling herself all along, that she simply needed a break, some rest, maybe a change of pace. She watched the doctor's expression as he took her blood, a look of calm professionalism that only heightened her sense of dread. A few days later, she received a call asking her to return for the results. Sitting in that sterile room, Raylan felt her heart pound as the doctor entered with a somber expression. She braced herself, clinging to hope. But when he spoke, his words cut through her like shards of glass. "Raylan, you've tested positive for HIV." The room spun, her thoughts scattering in 1,000 directions, each one more terrifying than the last. She sat there, numb, unable to process the weight of those words. Her mind raced through every moment, every memory, every interaction that could possibly explain this nightmare. She was always. How could this happen? The doctor's voice faded into the background as her world came crashing down around her. She clung to a thread of disbelief, telling herself that this had to be a mistake, some terrible error in the lab. It couldn't be real. It just couldn't. Determined to prove it wrong, Raylan went to another hospital, submitted herself to another round of tests, hoping, praying that somehow this second test would clear her of this horrifying diagnosis. But days later, she was given the same result. Positive. A third hospital, another round of tests. The answer was always the same. Each result felt like a sledgehammer to her heart, chipping away at her last sliver of hope, forcing her to confront a truth she could barely bring herself to believe. She had HIV. It was real, and yet she couldn't understand how. The questions flooded her mind, each one more painful than the last. She hadn't been with anyone but her husband. She had never strayed, never taken a single risk. Her life had been marked by fidelity, by loyalty, by a commitment to the very values she believed would protect her. So how could this be happening? In the dark silence of those nights, Raylan lay awake, her mind swirling with fears and doubts she had never allowed herself to consider. The pieces weren't adding up. Every explanation she tried to find fell apart under the weight of the truth, leading her back to one terrifying, impossible question. Could it be Omari? The thought struck her with a force that left her breathless. She wanted to dismiss it, to tell herself that it was an unfounded suspicion, a cruel twist of her own imagination. But as she lay there, alone with her thoughts, the whispers grew louder, refusing to let her go. How could she ask him? How could she voice a question that would shake the very foundation of their marriage? What if it wasn't him? Would he think she had been unfaithful? Would he turn the blame on her, accuse her of betrayal? The doubts gnawed at her, each one twisting the knife deeper. With each test result, each confirmation, the impossible began to feel inevitable. And Raylan knew, deep down, that there was only one way to find the answer she dreaded. She would have to look for herself. She would have to uncover the truth, even if it meant discovering a darkness she wasn't ready to face. Raylan had always trusted Omari. In all their years together, she'd never once questioned his loyalty. She prided herself on being the type of wife who trusted without hesitation, who believed in the strength of their bond. Her love for him had always been unwavering, and she'd built their life around that foundation. The thought of snooping, of crossing a boundary she'd always respected, felt foreign and wrong. But now, doubt was a steady thrum in her mind, growing louder each day. Every time she looked at Omari, a shadow crept into her heart. She wanted to push it away, to remind herself that he was the man she had chosen, the man she had shared her dreams with. But the question lingered, gnawing at her with a force she couldn't silence. Could he have betrayed her? Could the unthinkable really be true? Raylan's days became a haze of conflicting emotions. She'd catch herself lost in thought, feeling the weight of shame pressing down on her, her chest tight with guilt. She felt as though even considering this was a betrayal of her own, a betrayal of the love they had shared, of the life they had built. She hated herself for it. She hated the way doubt crept into her heart, wrapping around her thoughts, refusing to let go. Am I losing my mind? She wondered, her mind racing through every memory, every moment that once felt so secure. She remembered the quiet nights they'd spent together, the laughter, the warmth of his touch, the small gestures that had made her feel loved. How could any of it have been a lie? How could he be capable of hiding something so monstrous? But then the fear would creep back in, quiet but unrelenting. The unshakable truth of her diagnosis sat heavy within her, a constant reminder that something, somewhere, had gone terribly wrong. She thought of the hospitals, the endless tests, the doctors' voices, each one confirming the reality she couldn't escape. And each time her mind circled back to the only possibility that made sense. Her hands trembled each time she thought about confronting him, about speaking aloud the fear that had come to dominate her every waking moment. What if she was wrong? What if he hadn't betrayed her, and this was all some terrible mistake? She knew him. Omari would be devastated to know she had even considered this, that she could doubt him so deeply. He was her husband, her partner, the man she'd promised to trust through everything. And yet the shadow of suspicion loomed too large to ignore. The thought of investigating him, of invading his privacy, felt wrong. She had always believed in honesty, in respecting each other's boundaries. But now desperation overpowered her shame. She felt like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff, caught between her loyalty and the horrifying suspicion that he was hiding something. She didn't want to cross that line, but every day, every unanswered question pushed her closer. One night, unable to sleep, Raylan sat up in bed and looked at Omari's phone on the nightstand. It was right there, so close, yet the mere thought of touching it made her heart race with guilt. She could feel her pulse quicken, her palms growing cold. She wanted to believe in him, to believe that he was innocent, that her fears were baseless. But the image of those test results haunted her, an unrelenting reminder of the truth she couldn't deny. That night, Omari came home late, his face etched with exhaustion. He barely glanced in Raylan's direction as he walked in, his body slumped, moving like a man carrying invisible burdens. She watched him silently, the unspoken questions burning in her mind, but she held her tongue. He muttered a tired "good night," made his way to the bathroom, and soon returned to their bed, collapsing onto the mattress with a sigh. Within minutes he was asleep, his breathing deep and steady, oblivious to the turmoil that consumed her. Raylan lay beside him, wide awake, the cold fingers of doubt wrapping tighter around her heart. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts spinning, torn between trust and suspicion. But tonight she couldn't ignore it. She needed answers. She had to know. Slowly, her gaze drifted to his phone on the nightstand. She knew it was wrong. She knew that the simple act of reaching for his phone would cross a line she'd sworn she'd never cross. But as her mind replayed the endless doctor's visits, the test results, the diagnosis that had shattered her world, a force stronger than guilt pushed her forward. With trembling hands, she reached over, gently picked up his phone, and held it close to his hand. She took a deep breath, her pulse racing as she pressed his thumb to the screen, unlocking it. Omari stirred for a moment, his body shifting, but he didn't wake. He was too exhausted to notice. The screen lit up, and she stared down at it, her heart pounding as she navigated to his WhatsApp messages. She swallowed, her throat tight as she braced herself for what she might find. The first few chats were names she recognized, friends, family, colleagues. But then, just below those familiar names, her eyes fell on a contact saved as Sugar. Her breath caught in her throat, her heart skipping a beat. Sugar? She whispered to herself, the name echoing in her mind. That wasn't her, and it wasn't a nickname she'd ever heard him use. With a sense of dread pooling in her stomach, she tapped on the chat. And what she saw next made her blood run cold. The profile picture was unmistakable, Cameron Lattimore, Omari's boss. She felt a chill spread through her body, an electric current of shock that left her frozen, staring at the screen in disbelief. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages, each line hitting her like a physical blow. She read words that twisted her stomach, messages that painted a picture she couldn't bear to see. Photos, videos, each one more explicit than the last, showing a side of Omari she had never known. Messages filled with intimate promises, flirtations, and something darker, something she'd never imagined in her wildest nightmares. One message stood out, the words searing into her mind. I can't wait to be in you. Raylan's hands went numb, her vision blurred with tears she hadn't even realized were forming. She read on, the lines between Omari and Cameron becoming more intimate, more brazen, a twisted world hidden just beneath the surface of the life she thought she knew. There were emojis, vulgar jokes, messages hinting at secret encounters, each one a stab of betrayal that tore deeper into her heart. You might be my boss at the office, another message read, but I'm the boss after hours. A string of suggestive emojis followed, the casual intimacy in their exchange chilling her to the core. Raylan couldn't breathe. She felt as if the ground had been pulled from under her, her reality shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The weight of the betrayal, the magnitude of the lies, pressed down on her chest, leaving her gasping for air. She looked at Omari's sleeping form, peaceful, oblivious, while her own world was crumbling. How could he? The man she had loved so deeply, trusted so blindly, was leading a double life. And worse, he had brought this darkness into her own body, leaving her to bear the consequences of his betrayal. The messages, the images, the reality of it all swirled in her mind, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. The man she had shared her life with, the one she had vowed to stand beside, had been lying to her all along. And now, as she sat there, the truth laid bare before her. She knew that nothing would ever be the same. As she read on, her mind circled back to all the time she'd made excuses for Omari's late nights, his exhaustion, his sudden lack of interest in intimacy. She had tried so hard to be understanding, to support him as a loving, patient wife. She had stifled her own needs, holding back her desires to give him the space she thought he needed. She had been the responsible one, the understanding one, a wife who never complained. But now she realized the bitter truth. All this time, while she'd been trying to be patient and supportive, Omari had been giving himself to someone else. And not just anyone. His boss, the man who held power over his career, his decisions, his very life. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than she could have imagined. A twisted deception that left her feeling hollow and broken. A fresh wave of anger washed over her as the realization sank in. Not only had Omari betrayed her trust, but he had brought back a virus that would alter the course of her life forever. A disease that would bind her to medication for the rest of her days. She, who had always avoided even the smallest pills, now faced a future of doctors, treatments, and a daily reminder of the life-altering mistake he had made. Her hands shook as she reached for the phone again, needing to see more, needing to confirm that this was real, that this was her reality. She saved every piece of evidence she found, screenshots of the messages, the photos, the incriminating exchanges. Then, with a bitter resolve, she deleted the images from his phone, wiped any trace that she had seen them. She slipped out of WhatsApp, locked the phone, and placed it back on the nightstand, as if it were a ticking bomb. As Omari slept peacefully beside her, Raylin sat in the darkness, her mind racing with questions, with anger, with a helpless sorrow that felt like it might swallow her whole. She had done everything right. She had loved him, supported him, trusted him, and this was her reward. "Why me?" she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible, her heart heavy with despair. She had been a good wife, a faithful partner, someone who had given her all to a marriage she thought was built on honesty and respect. And yet, here she was, betrayed, infected, left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered beyond repair. She couldn't see a way forward. The weight of the betrayal, the depth of the deceit left her feeling trapped, paralyzed by a future she had never anticipated. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Raylin sat in silence, her mind lost in the devastation that Omari had left in his wake. She had no idea what she would do next, only that she could never look at him the same way again. The next morning, Raylin sat at the kitchen table, a letter folded neatly in front of her. Her hands were steady, her gaze hard as she stared at the paper. The words she had written a reflection of the broken trust, the anger, and the heartbreak she could no longer keep to herself. She had spent the night in silence, replaying the messages, the images, the lies that had shattered her world. And now, she was ready for the truth. As Omari entered the kitchen, she looked up, meeting his gaze with a cold intensity that left him shifting uncomfortably. He sensed something was wrong, but he moved toward her with his usual composure, as if the betrayal she'd uncovered hadn't happened. As if the life they had shared hadn't been destroyed by his secrets. Without a word, Raylin slid the letter across the table, watching as Omari hesitated, his brow furrowing as he took the paper. He unfolded it, his eyes scanning the lines, the shock and confusion flickering across his face as he read her words. He looked up, his face pale, his mouth opening to say something, but the words seemed to die on his lips. "Raylin, how could you do this to me?" Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay a current of pain, anger, and disbelief. "I trusted you, Omari. I loved you. And this is what I get in return?" Omari stared at her, his face tightening as he forced a look of innocence. "Raylin, I don't know what you're talking about. You're not making any sense." "Raylin." She took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she held his gaze. "I know, Omari. I know about you and Cameron. I know everything. And I know that you gave me HIV. He flinched, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker, but he quickly masked it, his voice hardening. "Raylin, this is ridiculous. I don't know where you're getting these ideas, but whatever you think you know, it's not true." "Raylin." She reached into her bag, pulling out her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the saved screenshots. She placed the phone in front of him, the messages, the pictures staring back at him, undeniable proof of his lies. For a moment, Omari sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the screen, his face expressionless. She waited for a reaction, for an apology, for some sign of remorse. But instead, he pushed the phone back toward her, his jaw clenched, his voice cold. "So what? You're going to throw this in my face now. You went through my phone. The calmness of his tone, the lack of any emotion, struck her like a slap. This is your response? She whispered, her voice cracking. You infected me, Omari. You betrayed me, and you brought this into my life, and you don't even care. Omari looked away, his eyes hardening as he stood up, straightening his suit jacket. I don't have time for this, Raylan. I have to get to work. Raylan, you don't have time for this. For me? The words tumbled out of her, a wave of rage and pain that she could no longer contain. You have time to sleep with your boss, to risk everything we built, to destroy my life. But you don't have time to even face what you've done. Omari paused, his gaze meeting hers for a fleeting moment, his expression unreadable. He exhaled slowly, the faintest hint of frustration crossing his face, as if her pain were nothing more than an inconvenience. I don't know what you expect me to say, he replied coldly. I made a mistake. We'll talk about this when I get back. And with that, he turned, grabbing his keys, his briefcase, walking out the door without a backward glance. Raylan sat there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, watching as the man she had loved so deeply, the man she had trusted with everything, left her in silence, as though she were nothing, as though their life meant nothing. She felt the depth of his betrayal settle over her, a hollow ache that would not go away. To understand the depth of Omari's betrayal, we have to go back to the beginning, the moment his loyalty first started to crack, the moment his life split into two. It started innocently enough, or so he told himself. Omari was ambitious, driven, a man with dreams of rising in his career, and Cameron Lattimore, his boss, was the key to that success. Cameron was known for his influence, his connections, and the way he could turn someone's career around with a single nod of approval. To Omari, he was both a mentor and a figure of admiration, someone who embodied the kind of success Omari wanted to achieve. At first, it was just late-night meetings, drinks after work, Cameron sharing stories of his life and achievements, slowly drawing Omari into his world. Cameron had a magnetic pull, an energy that Omari found hard to resist. When Cameron spoke, people listened. When he commanded, they followed. Omari was no exception. But as the weeks went by, Omari began to notice gradual shifts in their interactions, small gestures, lingering glances, compliments that felt a bit too personal, too intimate. Cameron would place a hand on Omari's shoulder, a touch that lingered just a second too long, or stand close enough that Omari could feel his presence in a way that was almost intentional. At first, Omari dismissed these moments, telling himself they were nothing, that he was reading too much into it. But deep down, he felt the pull, the thrill of something forbidden. He would catch himself wondering what it all meant, why his heart would race whenever Cameron was near. And each time he'd push the thoughts away, burying them beneath layers of denial and self-justification. Then, one evening, after a long day at the office, Cameron invited Omari out for a drink. They sat in a dimly lit bar, their conversation slipping from work into something deeper, something more personal. I trusted you with my life, and you threw it all away. For what? A secret life you thought you could hide forever? Omari's face twisted in irritation, his voice growing colder, sharper. You don't get it, Raylan. My life, my career, none of that would have survived if people knew. I couldn't risk everything for a mistake. The word hung in the air, cutting through her like a knife. A mistake. That's what he called it. A mistake that had cost her health, her future, her very sense of self. Her heart clenched, the pain giving way to a rage that burned deep, consuming every part of her that had once loved him. Is of Raylan's case. Was she a cold-blooded killer, or a woman driven to the edge by betrayal and heartbreak? The courtroom was packed with reporters, spectators, and strangers who had come to witness the drama unfold, each one eager to hear the details of a love story turned tragedy. The prosecution built a case that was clear and unforgiving. They painted Raylan as a woman consumed by rage, a woman who had taken the law into her own hands, willing to kill in order to satisfy her need for revenge. They recounted the events of that fateful night, presenting the gun as evidence, emphasizing the finality of her actions. For them, it was simple. Raylin had planned to kill Omari. She had waited for him, confronted him, and in a moment of rage, she had pulled the trigger. The defense, however, argued that this was more than a simple crime of passion. They laid bare the psychological torment Raylin had endured, the devastating betrayal that had unraveled every aspect of her life. Her attorney described her as a loving wife, a woman who had trusted her husband completely, only to have that trust shattered in the most intimate and destructive way possible. They spoke of her diagnosis, the disease Omari had concealed from her, the deep emotional trauma that had driven her to the edge. Psychologists took the stand to explain the concept of betrayal trauma, detailing how Raylin's discovery of her husband's affair and infection had led her to a breaking point. They described how the psychological impact of such a profound betrayal could distort a person's sense of reality, how the pain and helplessness could drive someone to act in ways they might otherwise never consider. The experts argued that Raylin had been pushed beyond her limits, that her actions were the result of an unbearable combination of shock, fear, and anger. The courtroom listened intently, each testimony adding another layer to the story, another dimension to the tragedy. Friends and family testified to Raylin's character, describing her as compassionate, loyal, a woman who had always valued kindness and integrity. They spoke of her dedication to her marriage, of the love she had once shared with Omari, and how his betrayal had shattered her sense of self. The prosecution countered by focusing on the physical evidence. Forensic experts testified about the gun, explaining how Raylin had retrieved it, how the ballistics matched, how her fingerprints covered the weapon. Crime scene investigators described the chilling quiet of the room when they had arrived, the finality of her actions etched into every detail. The prosecution emphasized her choice, her decision to end Omari's life instead of seeking help or walking away. The legal proceedings brought to light every aspect of Raylin's life, every moment of her marriage, every choice that had led her to that day. As the trial wore on, the jury became visibly torn, grappling with the complexity of the case. On one hand, there was the undeniable crime, a life taken in an act of rage. On the other, there was the undeniable pain, the deep sense of betrayal that had driven Raylin to the edge. When the jury finally reached a verdict, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Raylin stood, her heart pounding, as she waited to hear her fate, her mind replaying every painful moment, every choice that had led her to this point. The jury found her guilty of second-degree murder, recognizing the emotional torment that had influenced her actions, but ultimately holding her accountable for the life she had taken. The judge acknowledged the unique circumstances of her case, the betrayal that had driven her to such a dark place, but made it clear that her decision had crossed an irreversible line. Raylin was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15. As the sentence was announced, the courtroom sat in silence, the weight of the tragedy hanging over them, a reminder of the darkness that can lie hidden within love, trust, and loyalty. As she was led away in handcuffs, Raylin felt the finality of it all settle into her bones. She had acted out of pain, out of betrayal, but now she would live with the consequences of her choices.
We're back, YouTubers. As you can see, the husband betrayal, not living out his truth. giving that wife a disease that she can't get rid of, HIV. That's terrible. So I just want to pray for this sister and that the Lord will help her as she get out of prison. And it's so sad, that these guys are not living in their truth. Dudes, live in your truth, man. If you're on the down low, whatever, tell these sisters, man, quit living undercover. That woman had a right to know who you are and what you're about. So that's it for this video. Thumbs up, like and share this video. Please support us through Cash App. That's GRC $mantrap. God bless you and the Lord say the same. I'll talk to you next week with a wonderful, wonderful video. And thank you for tuning into the Greg's Review Show. Bye bye.